The sun had barely risen when the quiet suburban morning in Maplehurst started to break. The sound of helicopters slicing through the cool morning air shattered the usual tranquility, sending waves of confusion rippling through the neighborhood. At first, it sounded like a distant, industrial noise, a faint buzz in the distance. But it grew louder, closer, more thunderous by the second. Before I could even take my first sip of coffee, the once peaceful street turned into a scene straight out of an action movie. My neighbors, those curious, coffee-clutching souls, spilled out onto their lawns, half in pajamas, half in the kind of casual clothes that looked like they were meant for a backyard barbecue but were now in full display for something entirely unexpected. People grabbed their phones, holding them high to capture whatever madness was about to unfold. And then, out came Karen, our HOA president, the self-declared queen of Maplehurst. She emerged from her front door wearing a silk bathrobe, her wild eyes flashing with panic. For a moment, it looked like she was about to deliver some great proclamation, perhaps another one of her ridiculous neighborhood rules. But no, this wasn't the usual HOA drama. This time, Karen's prized possession, her shining white Lexus SUV, was in the process of being lifted off the ground, slowly dangling in the air by the heavy chains attached to a helicopter hovering above. It was a spectacle. Karen stood there, rooted to the spot, her mouth open in shock, her hair flapping wildly behind her like some kind of bedraggled superhero. Her screams echoed through the cul-de-sac. People laughed, others gasped, and a few took a step back as they watched her car, the very one that had become her tool of oppression, rise into the sky. To anyone watching, it was a moment of pure justice. But to me, it was simply the culmination of a battle that had been brewing for years. Karen had been the HOA president for far too long. For as long as I'd lived in Maplehurst, 15 years, Karen had always been the one with the clipboard, the one who ruled with an iron fist. She had a set of rules that weren't so much suggestions as they were commandments, and she was more than willing to use those rules to control every aspect of the neighborhood. It didn't matter that her reign was built on the smallest of infractions, whether it was the height of your grass, the number of flowers in your garden, or the angle of your mailbox. One of the more ridiculous run-ins I'd had with her involved my rose bushes. They were untamed, as she called them, more like wild lions than flowers. But in my eyes, they were beautiful. She, of course, didn't care about beauty. She cared about compliance. My roses had been there before she'd even moved into the neighborhood. But when Karen saw them, she saw a violation. I calmly explained that they were fine as they were, but she wasn't having it. Rules are rules, she said, as though that somehow explained everything. And I could tell right then and there, this woman had no boundaries. Still, I never thought I'd get to a point where I'd need to fight back. That is, until she decided to make my life miserable over something as ridiculous as flowers. One morning, I walked outside with my coffee, ready to enjoy a quiet day, only to find Karen's her Lexus parked directly across my driveway, blocking both of my garage doors. Not on the curb, not in front of the house, but across my driveway, parked with the precision of someone who had planned it all out. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. But then, under the windshield wiper, I found it note, in bold, block letters. Perhaps this will remind you that no one is above HOA compliance. Trim your roses, or next time I'll have your car booted. Signed, HOA President Karen. I couldn't believe it. She had parked her car in front of my garage to punish me for not trimming a few roses. I stood there, dumbfounded, holding my coffee cup, as the absurdity of it all settled in. By mid-morning, the whole neighborhood had gathered outside, like they were waiting for some kind of show. Some neighbors walked their dogs, but I could tell they were all just waiting to see how this would unfold. Teenagers on bikes whispered to each other, clearly enjoying the drama. The anticipation was thick in the air. Everyone had their phones out, filming like they were waiting for the next viral moment. I had to do something, and quickly. "Karen," I called out, loud enough for the entire block to hear. "Would you mind moving your tank off my driveway?" From across the street, her front door slammed open, and there she was, strutting toward me like she was the queen of the neighborhood. She wore designer sunglasses perched on her nose, her hair sprayed into some indestructible helmet, and she held a clipboard like it was a gavel in a courtroom. "Excuse me," she said, without a hint of shame. "This is a lawful immobilization of property. You've repeatedly refused to comply with HOA standards. Until you do, your access is revoked." I blinked. "Revoked? This is my driveway, Karen, my property." But she wasn't hearing any of it. "You signed the covenant when you moved in," she said, her voice dripping with superiority. "The HOA has the right to enforce compliance measures." The neighbors, standing around in a loose circle, were quietly biting their lips to keep from laughing. They had seen it before, the same condescending attitude, the same smug power play, but this time, they weren't laughing at me. They were waiting to see how I would handle this one. I set my coffee cup gently on the hood of her Lexus. Her eyes widened. "Move it," I said, my voice steady, "or I'll have it towed." Her smile was almost too perfect, as though she'd been rehearsing it. "Go ahead," she purred. "I already called the towing company. They're under contract with us. They won't touch my car." And just like that, she walked back inside, leaving her Lexus sprawled across my driveway like a symbol of her absolute power. The crowd around us murmured, some shaking their heads, others barely containing their laughter. But Karen wasn't done. She had one in her mind, and she was going to make sure everyone knew it. But me, I wasn't done. This was just the beginning. That evening, I sat on my porch, sipping bourbon, thinking long and hard about how to take her down. And then it hit me. Karen wasn't just trying to control my driveway. She was trying to humiliate me, to show the neighborhood that she could crush anyone who didn't follow her rules. Well, if she wanted a battle of power, I was about to give her one. I called Rodney, an old friend from my contracting days who ran a heavy-lift helicopter service. We went way back. I explained the situation to him, not even fully believing what I was suggesting, but somehow knowing this was the only way to end it. We spent the next few hours mapping it out when and how it would happen. I couldn't just make it a stunt. It had to be airtight, legally speaking. So, I did my homework, going through the HOA charter, city ordinances, even parking laws. And, as it turned out, Karen's car was technically trespassing on my property. Trespassing is a reasonable cause for removal, and that's exactly what I planned to do. But here's where it got good. I wasn't just going to take her car anywhere. I had a more fitting destination in mind, the mayor's lawn. He had been Karen's biggest enabler. He'd helped her rise to power, turning a blind eye to her abuse. So, what better place to deliver her Lexus than right on his perfectly manicured, pristine grass? Saturday morning arrived, and I could feel the anticipation building. The helicopter was set to lift off at exactly 9 a.m., so I spent the morning pretending everything was normal. I even waved to Karen as she sipped her smoothie on her porch. But then the unmistakable sound of helicopter blades cut through the air, loud and booming. It was like the moment the music swells before the climax of a movie. People stopped in their tracks. Heads turned. Phones shot up like everyone knew what was coming. Rodney's helicopter came into view, its massive blades sending wind through the trees, knocking hats off heads, and stirring up all kinds of dust. But it wasn't just any helicopter, it was the kind that could carry a shipping container with ease. As the helicopter descended, I could see Karen standing frozen in her tracks. The helicopter was coming for her car, and there was nothing she could do about it. In seconds, chains were attached to her Lexus, and it started to rise, lifting off the ground like something out of a surreal dream. Karen screamed, but the sound of the helicopter blades drowned her out. "That's my car. Put it down. I am the HOA president," she wailed. The neighbors, for the first time in years, erupted in laughter, their phones capturing every moment. Some cheered, others yelled out in joy, And one old neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, shouted, "It's happening! It's actually happening!" And then, just as Karen's cries became distant, the helicopter ascended higher and higher, taking her Lexus with it far above the neighborhood, like a symbol of her power being ripped away. The car swayed in the air, caught in the chains, gleaming under the sunlight. But this wasn't the end. Oh no! This was just the beginning of a much bigger plan.